Hello and welcome to Beyond the Bio. This week I am delighted to be joined by James Moon, who is a northeast-based aviation entrepreneur and aircraft trader who built his career in one of the world's most complex industries after leaving school at just 16. James started flying at 13, gained his pilot's license at 17 and went on to found multiple aviation businesses focused on aircraft sales, trading and advisory. Today, his companies work globally with aircraft owners, operators and high net worth clients. Alongside building his businesses, James has become a recognised aviation commentator, appearing on Sky News, The Wall Street Journal and major international media, all without spending a penny on marketing and PR. This is an incredible story. I'm excited to get stuck in. James, welcome to Beyond the Bio.
Thank you for having me.
So your journey into aviation started very young.
Yep.
What was it about flying at 13 that completely hooked you in?
I was always a plane geek. Ever since I was young, every Christmas, birthday, always bang, something aviation related. And then when I was 13, my parents, I think, had enough of me going on about planes. They booked me a flying lesson at Newcastle, and obviously that was probably the worst thing they could have done because that just made things, exacerbated everything.
And is that the age that you can start learning to fly?
Yeah, you can start that young, but
No
you can't
way.
get your license till you're 17. So obviously at school, I was hooked straight away, so I wouldn't concentrate anymore. I was just obsessed with trying to get my license, and obviously got it when I was 17 after a bit of adversity along the way. Yeah.
That is insane. Do they totally get it now? Are they like, oh, right, yeah,
Yep.
so he was obsessed, but it's turned out good?
Yeah, it was like a bit of an unhealthy obsession because it was like tunnel vision. That's all I wanted to do, and be a pilot, be an airline pilot. At the weekends, I'd be on Flight Simulator and just really wanted to have it. And then obviously when I got my GCSEs, I knew I wasn't going to do a further
Exactly,
education.
because you left school at 16 to
Yep.
pursue pilot training despite pressure to follow a more traditional path. So what gave you that confidence at that point to trust your own direction? Was it just this total obsession or was there something else?
Yeah, it's such a hard decision. I feel for a lot of 16-year-olds that age, it's like such a life decision that you've got to make, and you see all the crossroads of where you could go. And all my brothers had gone to university, so I was like the first, almost like the black sheep of the family, not to go. And obviously my parents were incredibly supportive and kind of just said, go for it. And then went down the pilot route and, got my pilot's license, but albeit after, broken back and all these injuries.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So you suffered a broken back during the training
Yep.
and were told that you might never fly again.
Yes. A kick in the teeth. It was
How did you break your back?
football.
Oh,
And it was
no.
my L5 vertebrae, and kind of opens your eyes up a little bit because you're like, well, how precious life is. 1 minute you want to do that, and then that happened out of the blue, which was unfortunate. But then, obviously, didn't prove the medical staff wrong. Managed to get my license just after my 17th birthday, so I was pretty, fortunate to be able to continue with my dream. But then, obviously, I found the world of aircraft trading along the way.
That's amazing. So your move into aircraft trading came from helping to sell a private jet.
Yes.
I mean, this sounds so glamorous. What did you see in that experience that others had missed?
Yeah, it was an interesting one. The owner approached me, someone local at Newcastle, and said, could I help sell it for him? And being the plane geek that I was, I knew where all the plane websites were. So I'd go online. I would always check the market, which was a bit odd for like a 16-year-old, 17-year-old.
So were you thinking about buying your own at this point then?
I think I was one of these dreamers. Was like, I would just love to fly around the world in a private jet. And so when he said that, could I help him sell it? I took the photos, put it online, put it on these various websites, and I kind of didn't really talk commissions, didn't have agreements or anything in place. Found a buyer, and he's like, I'll give you X amount. And I was like, well, that's actually more than what a pilot would make in a year. And I was like, oh, there's a lot of money that could be made here. And that kind of was a blessing in disguise, really, because it turned my head. And I was like, yeah, flying's great. I feel like I'd be wasted behind a cockpit door. Right. And then that's when I thought, well, let's go all in and learn about business, and think, well, if I do 5 or 6 of these deals a year, I'm actually making a lot of money.
What would you say has been the biggest lesson from scaling businesses in what is such a global and relationship-driven sector?
Yeah, it's tough in that sense because you're coming almost late to the party. There's a lot of aircraft owners that have owned aircraft for years and they've got their cozy relationships with a broker. So it's almost like, how do you break that down, or how do you come across a first-time buyer that wants to buy an aircraft? And I think that's one thing I realized early on was, how do I get in with all these owners? So I approached as many operators, financiers, kind of owners that I knew were kind of in ownership, managed to to kind of just approach them directly. It would be my style was quite direct and just saying, look, I'm kind of new to the game. I'm more interested in a long-term partnership than making a quick dollar, and that resonated with a lot of owners because there's a lot of I'd say it's a bit like a Wild West industry. Anybody could be a broker. All you have to have is a laptop. I call them the Gmail brokers. There's people that think they can do it, and they just try and go out there and they cause carnage in the industry. So I knew to get taken seriously, I had to get some good listings, and I was fortunate enough very early on to get in with some very good owners that had been in the industry a long time, but they liked my style. I was quite direct and honest and quite frank with them. And I think that resonated because a lot of owners sometimes get told what they want to hear, and I would say to them, actually, aircraft's not worth that. And one owner in particular in the US always kind of, I would say, praised my style because if he thought his aircraft was worth X, I would tell him it wasn't. And then that actually got me the listing. So that's just, I'd say that's how I've kind of had the success I've had is because, last time I checked, we had about 21 aircraft for sale, making us number one dealer in the UK, which I never thought we'd have. But I think it's purely because of how I communicate and kind of the values I operate in.
That's wild. And this is based from the Northeast?
Northeast, yeah.
Do you have an office or anything, or is it all
No,
remote?
All from home.
So presumably then it became kind of word of mouth referrals once you've got a few under your belt because they'd be all telling their mates that they've got.
Yeah, and I think when I first set up, there was a lot of, I would say, not to be like ageist or anything, but towards people. There was a lot of elderly people in the industry, and it felt quite threatened. And there would be, the comments you would come across, and I think you need that motivation to prove people wrong. And the only tough thing is all the time zones. So I've got aircraft in New Zealand all the way to LA, and that's hard when you're kind of on your own and you've got all these time zones to work with. Sometimes it's hard to get sleep if you've got multiple deals on the go, and that's something I kind of struggle with. And everyone keeps saying hire people, reduce the workload, but then it's trying to teach it is quite tough because it's like, how do you teach someone to sell a plane? And it's it does feel like an estate agent. Similar to a stage, but then there's so many things that with an aircraft that makes it quite complicated.
It's fascinating. I've never been on a private jet.
Not yet.
Well, at any time you spot an opportunity for me to go on someone's private jet, you need to give me a shout.
Yes.
So you've achieved major media coverage, which is the thing I really want to talk to you about, but without having to spend anything to get that. How did the first opportunity come about? Did someone approach you, or have you always been going after these opportunities?
Yeah, so when I had my broken back and then I got my license, I thought I'd reach out to a few local press and just say, look, I've got my license, overcame a broken back. And, the likes of Look North did coverage on me. A few of the regional press covered it. And it almost felt like quite easy to get the PR. So when I set up the business, I was like, no one's just going to cover someone set up a jet business. So it was like, how do I make a compelling story? Yeah. And it was almost like I turned the adversity into business. And obviously that all got covered, it got picked up. And then I've always been quite clever in trying to find a story out of anything. So like the Daily Mail, for example, when COVID came along, I reached out to them and just said, look, a lot of people don't fly privately now because of COVID and germaphobes and all that. And then next thing you know, I had an article, main story on This Is Money, and that put traffic through the roof. People were reaching out, and that was just one email out the blue, and then had a good conversation with the journalist, sent them the photos, and then that led, and then you get the credibility. It gets picked up by other.
Do you have a website?
I did have a website. Yeah.
So do you link all of these stories on the website?
Kind of, yeah. But then it's like it feels like at times when it couldn't cope, the website, there was that much demand. Wow. So at one point it went offline, and then it was like, because so many people were going, and then I always say I'm quite thick-skinned because somebody said on the photo, I said about how setting up a business, and they commented, it would have been better setting up a gym from the looks of it. And I was like saying, sometimes you got to take it, you got to have thick skin. And I think that's one thing I've always had, really.
Yeah, wow, amazing. So you're describing yourself as self-taught when it comes to PR, and you totally get it around that hook, because so many people want to do a salesy, pitch a salesy story, and as you've identified, they're not interested. So what have been the key principles that you've learned through teaching yourself how to do this? What advice have you got?
Yeah, I think it's just always trying to find an angle. And, I was trying, for example, every Christmas time, I know that industry publications, especially in aviation, don't really have anything to write about. So I'll drip feed a press release every year to say, look, this is what we've been up to this year. And it pretty much gets picked up by all of them. And one of them emails it to 50,000 people that are subscribed and doesn't cost me a penny. And so it's like little things like that. And somebody asked me about 2 months ago now, they were setting up the business and they were saying, like, how should we do it from a PR perspective? And I don't claim to be PR, I'm not qualified or anything like that, but I was almost like, well, you need to kind of get the word out there as best you can, locally and nationally, but then the industry press, try and find the angle that gives you that credibility, because as soon as you get those coverages, you go on Google, there you are, all the articles, and it adds so much credibility to a startup.
I totally agree. Many founders struggle to talk about themselves publicly. How did you get comfortable putting your voice out there as an industry commentator?
Yeah, I think I've always been self-aware. I think, you've kind of got to be really, I think there's a lot of people that aren't, they kind of handle it wrong. It's almost like blowing their trumpet, look how great they are, but you kind of got to be aware of how you come across. And I think my nana said it quite well once. She said two things. When I went to a meeting once, she said, it was like a PR related meeting, and she said, try not to be something you're not. And I was like, all right, okay, that's good, keeps you grounded. And then we were at an event once, and she introduced me as, this is James, he tries to sell planes. And I was like, it's brutal, but I've always had that at the back of my mind. I was like, I don't want to come across as, look how, because it is a sexy industry, private jets, and there's a lot of egos in it. And one thing, one of my owners has complimented me on. He said, you're very grounded, and I couldn't really, care less about the digits after an aircraft value. I'm more interested in just coming across as genuine and never changing. And I think that if you're true to yourself, really, I mean, it opens a lot of doors, and you don't know where it can go. So that would be my main advice.
Yeah, and it is a sexy industry, and before we started recording, you name dropped a couple of famous people that you'd met. Tell us a little bit about how how you've come to be hanging around with these famous people. What's the story there?
Yeah, so I mean, one day I was selling an aircraft and I got an email off a famous movie star.
Can we say who it is?
Well, it was John Travolta's email.
Yeah.
And I saw it and I was like, is it a wind up? And then I checked it and then I was like, oh, that LLC is his. And it's almost like, wow, James from like Northumberland, talking about an aircraft with this gentleman, and I was amazed. And then there's also been other ones as well, one of the Formula One ones, but then it's almost credit to the business, credit to the brand, and that you're able to have these conversations. But then on the flip side, you deal with CEOs of Fortune 500s, and they're like brutal in how they want, they expect the highest, level of service. They're used to it. And I think that's just one thing you kind of learn along the way, is that every client is so different, what their requirements are different, how you handle them is very unique. So I've got, in my little black book, I always say I've got people from little first time buyers who maybe have come into money that want to buy a jet for the first time, all the way up to I think my oldest client's just under 90, and he's very well off. They've got thousands of condos in the US that they rent, and that's kind of just gives you the spectrum of what you've got to, all the hats you've got to wear to manage expectations.
Yeah. Do you ever feel a bit starstruck or intimidated by any of these personalities?
A little bit at times. I mean, but then it's kind of you're just so focused with them.
I mean, Danny Zuko. I'd be so. Did you meet him?
I haven't met him, no. I mean,
Still time.
I would love a photo of me and him, and I mean
so
that
cool.
Because
he's really into flying, isn't he?
He's got a lot of planes as well, but you kind of learn from that though, because like I think the old me would have been like, oh my, sharing it on Instagram, look who's emailed me, and now I'm quite private and kind of say, well, this is I tell people.
So if someone watching or listening is thinking that they want to start gaining more media visibility this year, what would you advise as their first practical step to take?
I think just looking at themselves, and their business or whatever, and just thinking, well, how does this appeal? How can I get noticed, and for what? I mean, I was quite, it sounds awful, clever early on in my business, was because I had the relationships at the BBC and things. I actually organised a charity flight in a simulator in Newcastle.
And how did you have those relationships from pitching that initial story?
Yeah, pitching it.
Right.
So then I thought, well, why don't we, so it was about 20 school kids from one of the schools in Newcastle, but I hired one of the simulators, and obviously Look North came along, and we got like almost like the photos from it, and it added like that credibility to a business where you'd think we'd have like a CSR department and all that, but it just kind of got the word out there, and so I think for any business really, it's just trying to find your niche, looking at what works. And I think obviously with the rise of ChatGPT as well, everyone saying, well, looking at, you can almost quiz your business in a way. You could be like, well, how do we stand out, and try and look at that and then try and sell it. And I've had lots of rejections from PR people. I thought I've had a great story and you've never heard back, and you don't know which one might get picked up, but you kind of learn along the way. And I think, as I looked in my emails recently, some of my first PR emails were massive and like far too long. And you think, well, no wonder they didn't get picked up, because it was just
too much.
Too much. That's it.
So are you a lot briefer now with what you're putting forward?
Briefer and more direct, and kind of not shotgun approach, not plastering it to everybody and hit and hope. It's more, who do I have an existing relationship with, and if they're not going to cover it, why aren't they? Try and get feedback, and just kind of try and drip feed. I try and average one, if I can try and do one a month if I can, but the big one's always December, because I literally just say, I've done like another, well, each year has been a record year, so it always gets covered. When it comes to the I'd say B2C, so to speak, I haven't really had that exposure. So this new business that I'm doing, that's a whole different ball game, because it's almost like, how do I position myself? And I was saying to the guys just last week, I almost want to be like the Michael O'Leary of the private jet world, because it is an industry, it's under attack. It's everywhere. You see Taylor Swift do a flight in a private jet and everyone just assumes it's the same. Whereas, private aviation is used for, transporting organs, the CEOs, but yet here in Europe, they might want to, they're closing airports, the private jets, banning them. And it's almost like, who's the spokesperson, who's the figurehead? And it's quite interesting if you position yourself like that and be quite controversial and, maybe say things that get the free PR, that could actually work, and try and position yourself really as that Michael O'Leary.
Have you got any examples of where you've had a piece of coverage that's led directly to a sale, or has it been more around awareness building for you?
One of my first, when I launched the business, I sold a helicopter through somebody had seen my coverage. I don't know what publication it was in, but he'd seen it and then messaged me on LinkedIn and was like, I really want that plane that you saw. And I never would have thought he was a doctor, and actually in the US. And when I bring an aircraft to market, you don't really know who's going to buy it. You can think of the buyer profiles, but then this particular gentleman got in touch after seeing this article, and so cost me nothing but led to a sale.
What do you think is making business owners interesting to journalists versus that, just another company story?
I always think it's like a bit like the Lion King, holding the lion up on the top of the hill. It's almost like, why would a journalist lift you up?
Right,
and
okay,
I always think
good analogy. That's going to be in my head from now on.
And it's like, well, why would they pick you over anyone else? And I always think, well, when I read a press release I've done or whatever, I'd be like, is this news or is it just me being like egocentric? And I think I always try and make it as compelling, but also the angle. And naturally, especially here in the Northeast, private jets, they're always going to get the coverage because it's quite unique. There's not many people doing it. So I've always kind of got that pull. But when it comes to the national, you've got to try and create that hook. And obviously, when like COVID came along, and that was a great, as awful as that sounds, it was a great opportunity to actually talk about the devastating impact it was having on the sector.
What's still exciting you about aviation at the moment?
It never feels like work. Aviation, it just, every time I see a plane or get asked to work on a plane, I'm just super excited about it.
And do you still fly? As a pilot?
I've just got my license back because I've had a health issue for over 2 years, which was annoying. So they took away my license, and then just on January, I was like my first flight in 2 years. So trying to get my license back so I can be signed off again. So hopefully I'll be this summer I'll be back going solo again over the Northeast.
God, James, it's been so interesting talking to you. If anyone watching or listening wants to connect with you, where's the best place for them to find you?
Just like LinkedIn or my Moonjet Group socials as well, across all of them. But yeah, great to connect.
Amazing. And we'll pop those links in the show notes to make that super easy. Thank you.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. If you're serious about growing your profile, take our free profile assessment quiz to see where you're at right now and get hints and tips on how to improve your score. You'll find the link to the quiz in the show notes. If you've enjoyed the episode, it would be mint if you'd subscribe, like, and leave a review. See you next Monday.